This story is probably going to be the one sweeping the nation if I were a betting man. A homeless person who was being disruptive in a train in an attempt to be subdued was unfortunately strangled and killed, but also, I don't know if we know if it's even in strangulation that killed this guy. A guy named Jordan Neely was being aggressive on a New York subway. According to everybody, all witnesses there, police confirmed the witnesses. One of the witnesses spoke to TV, which we'll show you in a second. But according to pretty much everybody, he's wandering around the train, angry, mad, upset, said he didn't have food, didn't have water, and also he was ready to go to jail and didn't care if he lived. Those are quotes according to the police and according to the bystanders reporting to the police, and also this guy who was interviewed by the news. 3 different people attempted to restrain this guy because at the end of the day, are we in a society in which you just have to let somebody hurt you before you do anything proactive? Seems like it, according to this. But 3 people took matters into their own hands because there's no police anywhere to be found at any time, and tried to subdue/restrain this guy. Not going to play the big long video, but if you watch the big long video, there is a pretty big struggle ensuing for just kind of getting this guy under control. Again, according to witnesses, it doesn't seem to be a video of actually him on the train, but according to pretty much all of the witnesses and the police reports and the guy talking to the news, he was aggressive, disruptive, and disruptive is probably too light of a term. If you've ever been on a subway or public transportation in New York City, but also in LA, also in San Francisco, the BART system there, you may have encountered a severely aggressive or mentally disabled or strung out on drugs person who was very intimidating to everybody around. According, again, to all of the witness statements, this seemed to be one of those. And rather than let this guy hurt someone who is saying, I'm ready to go back to jail, rather than let this guy hurt someone, a couple people decided to say, hey, yeah, let's not let this guy just do whatever he wants, and let's restrain him until the cops get here. Again, unfortunately, the guy ended up passing away, which is going to be a whole other thing. Did he die from strangulation? There's more to this story that we'll bring up after this. I want to show you this news clip from, I believe, just New York City, and watch this. We'll discuss on the other side.
The video shows 3 strap hangers subduing the 30-year-old man after witness Juan Alberto Vasquez says he got on the northbound F train and began acting aggressively, threatening riders. Law enforcement sources with knowledge of the case confirm his account, saying according to a witness, the man began shouting, quote, "I want food. I'm not taking no for an answer. I'm ready to go back to jail, and I'll hurt anyone on this train."
The man got on the subway car and began to say a somewhat aggressive speech, saying that he was hungry, he was thirsty, and he didn't care about anything. He didn't care about going to jail, that he didn't care that he gets a big life sentence, and it doesn't matter if he died.
Vasquez says he was scared and believes others on the train were too. That's when he says a 24-year-old rider came up behind the man and put him in a chokehold, holding him there on the ground. 2 other men standing over them also helped subdue the man.
If there was fear, the people who were bluish or who were there, where he separated everything, moved from their place. I stayed sitting in my place because it was a little further away. But obviously those moments, well, one thinks fear, one thinks he may be armed.
Terrible situation regardless. Nobody wants to see anybody, 1, in this sort of a mental state, but 2, have to be subdued by bystanders. Now, a couple things going on here. The toxicology/autopsy report, which will probably take way too long after a bunch of cities have decided to riot, or a bunch of people in different cities have decided to riot, very possibly could show a lot of drug usage, which is pretty typical for somebody acting like this in a public place. And with that being said, it's difficult to say that strangulation was the cause of death, at least immediately. There's going to be a bunch of confusing nonsense around this, and it's going to get interesting. The more interesting part is, you know who the DA of Manhattan is? He made the news the last couple months. A guy named Alvin Bragg. may also know him from the guy who indicted former President Donald Trump. You may also know him as the guy who doesn't prosecute any crime whatsoever in the borough of Manhattan. However, if it's going to be advantageous politically for him, he will go ahead and do that. So the guy who doesn't prosecute crime and openly says that he doesn't really prosecute crime, the same guy who then, while not prosecuting violent crime, prosecutes a former sitting U.S. president on paperwork problems, mind you, not really even a crime in any stretch of the imagination, for something that Obama similarly did in terms of campaign finance violations, which are generally a fine, but decided to detain and arrest a former president, is now saying immediately after something, now that something is quote unquote gone viral, that this was definitely a homicide and we're going to go ahead and prosecute. Seems like a stretch. Also, I don't know if I mentioned this particular individual, Jordan Neely, which again, does anybody want this guy to die? No, absolutely not. And you can't be acting aggressively towards other people in a public place that causes enough fear in them to take proactive measures. Now, of course, if it comes out that he was just kind of standing there and this dude decided to put him in a chokehold and that was it, then yeah, that's you can't do that as a civilian. You can't just say that guy was threatening me when he wasn't threatening you. But I can't imagine that's going to be the case. I have to believe, according to all the witness statements, that nobody would just do that unless there was an actual fear of some sort of violent threat that this guy was clearly making. This person, Jordan Neely, I believe, according to that same New York news outlet, was arrested 44 times or has been arrested 44 times, which is a lot for a 30-year-old person. That being said, it has not stopped the protesters from coming out in full force. Lots of people in the political world have weighed in on this already, AOC being one of them. She's a representative in that area. AOC tweeted, almost immediately, Jordan Neely was murdered. But because he was a homeless person crying for food at the time when the city's raising rents and stripping services to militarize itself, while many in power demonize the poor, the murderer gets protected with passive headlines and no charges. It's disgusting, AOC says. That has changed since that tweet. They're investigating it as a homicide. Wow. Yeah, this whole idea of militarizing itself. Dang, this is wild. Anyways, that sort of stuff, the incendiary, there's lots of people on the internet saying Jordan Neely was lynched, which, again, not entirely sure if they're familiar with definitions of homicide, murder, and lynched, but the other problem here, again, it just goes without saying, it didn't really dawn on me to mention it because it doesn't actually matter to me. It's a white guy and a black guy. Where were we at? 13 minutes into this? Didn't even think to mention that because it doesn't actually matter. If you're acting aggressively and you're threatening to commit violence against people, it is within the rights of people around, if there's no police around, to take action on that to make sure people are safe. You can't just wait until people decide to hurt other people to intervene in a lot of ways. Someone named Edmund Smirk, I'm not sure who that is, but he tweeted something that I retweeted. It said, if only there was some sort of organized force staffed by individuals who are professionally trained to handle public disturbances in a safe and secure manner. So nevertheless, a lot of that sort of language caused this yesterday, a bunch of protests in the subway station. Check this out.
Neely! Justice for Jordan 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 Neely! Jordan Neely! Jordan Neely! Jordan Neely! Justice for Jordan.
Because race is apparently a thing in this, it was difficult to not notice the almost entirety of white people in that chanting for some sort of something. I don't know where people are falling on this. I don't know if this is I don't know if people are all, because AOC didn't make it a race thing. To her credit, she deserves 2% of credit there, because I don't know. She's because the majority of it was crazy. But she didn't make it a race thing necessarily. But I'm curious if people will make it a race thing or a poor thing. I think one of the things that a lot of people don't quite understand, I feel like that I don't know how to get people to recognize this. I know a lot of people closely that work in jails and law enforcement. And the one thing that they say is that homeless people who are out and about in public spaces are almost 100% of the time on some sort of drug currently, coming off some sort of drug, or have had their brain fried on drugs. The people that are homeless by, I don't know, some terrible situation, who knows, maybe they lost their job, got hit with some medical tragedy at the same time, and now all of a sudden they find themselves homeless and are not on drugs, those people aren't the ones causing the disturbances. So when people say homeless people, in most cases, if it's a publicly visible thing causing a disturbance, threatening people with violence, it is a bum or a junkie. I feel like people have to take that into account. So I'm curious. I don't know if this is going to be a race thing or it's going to be I'm sure it'll be made into a race thing. I'm sure Al Sharpton is on his way there now, if he hasn't already been there, to go make it a race thing. And I can see, Thursday, I can see this story picking up steam by the weekend and having riots throughout, different places. I hope not, by the way. I hope not. But if I were a betting man, given how a lot of children react to stories like this without any sort of nuanced depiction of it, it'll be interesting. I wouldn't bet on total peace throughout the country this weekend.